Picture this. When it comes to giant, prehistoric crocodiles, there is one crocodile that everyone agrees is the absolute peak. The Sarcosuchus, the super croc. A 40-foot river monster that was so massive, it regularly hunted actual dinosaurs. For decades, it has been crowned as the undisputed largest crocodile in Earth's history. Nothing else even came close. At least, that's what we were told. Because while Sarcosuchus was definitely huge, it wasn't actually the biggest crocodile. There was another crocodile, one that didn't just hunt small dinosaurs. It actively dragged top-tier apex predators into the water. A crocodile so undeniably heavy, it makes the super croc look almost normal. Yes, I'm making the claim that the super croc was overhyped, and let me explain why. If you really want to see why Sarcosuchus is completely overrated, you just have to look at its face. If you look at the skull of Sarcosuchus, the first thing you'll notice is the snout. It's incredibly long and incredibly thin. In the modern day, we actually have an animal with this exact same head shape. It's called a gharial. Gharials use their long, thin snouts to quickly slash through the water with minimal resistance to snap up fast-moving fish. The snout is basically just a giant pair of tweezers. It's highly specialized and insanely effective at catching slippery prey. But if you want to hunt a dinosaur, a pair of tweezers is a really bad weapon. When an animal is hunting large land prey, that prey is going to fight for its life. It's going to thrash and kick to escape. If you bite a thrashing 3-ton dinosaur with a snout shaped like a pair of tweezers, your snout is going to snap in half, and having your face break off is generally considered a pretty bad hunting strategy. The bone structure is simply too thin to handle the extreme twisting that comes from wrestling massive animals. Sarcosuchus was undeniably huge, but its anatomy proves that it spent its time sitting in rivers eating large fish. It wasn't dragging dinosaurs to their watery graves, because its skull physically couldn't handle the stress. But if you actually want to kill a dinosaur, you can't just be long, you have to be heavy. This is Deinosuchus. Its name literally translates to terror crocodile. And unlike the super croc, this animal actually lived up to its name. Deinosuchus lived in North America during the late Cretaceous period, sharing its habitat with some of the most famous dinosaurs in history. And sure, it might not have been quite as long as Sarcosuchus, but the length is pretty useless measurement when you're talking about combat. In the animal kingdom, mass is what actually matters, and Deinosuchus was thick. Sarcosuchus was stretched out and relatively slender. Deinosuchus was just pure, unmovable mass. It weighed an estimated 8.5 tons, making it vastly more muscular than the super croc, meaning its ancient relative of the modern alligator, and its entire body was basically just designed to smash things. When you have 8.5 tons of pure muscle sitting at the bottom of a river, you aren't sitting down there thinking,
"Man, I really hope a medium-sized trout swims by today."
You're targeting the biggest, heaviest things that walk up to the shoreline. But being heavy doesn't automatically mean you can kill a dinosaur. To do that, you need a very specific tool. If you put the skull of Deinosuchus next to Sarcosuchus, the difference is almost comical. Deinosuchus completely ditched the tweezers. Its skull was basically just a solid block of bone. The snout was broad, flat, and heavily reinforced. But the most important part is the teeth. Fish-eating crocodiles have thin, needle-like teeth designed to pierce and hold on to slippery prey. Deinosuchus had teeth that looked like, well, this. They were thick, blunt, and shaped like bananas. But if that tooth shape sounds familiar, it's because that's the exact same tooth shape as a Tyrannosaurus rex. These teeth aren't designed for slicing meat. They're designed to punch straight through thick armor, pierce into bone, and then not break. When a dinosaur starts violently thrashing around, thin teeth will shatter. Banana-shaped teeth will stay firmly anchored to the bone. Deinosuchus had a skull built specifically to take an insane amount of force. But having big teeth is only half the equation, because teeth are completely useless if you don't have the muscle to actually push them through the bone. To put the bite of Deinosuchus into perspective, we have to look at the modern saltwater crocodile. Today, the saltwater crocodile holds the record for the strongest recorded bite force of any living animal, clocking in around at 3,700 pounds per square inch. That's enough pressure to easily crush a bowling ball. But a saltwater crocodile only weighs about 1,000 pounds. Deinosuchus weighed 17,000 pounds. When scientists scaled up the biometrics of a crocodilian skull to an animal of this size, the numbers they got were, well, completely absurd. Deinosuchus is estimated to have had a bite force of anywhere from 18,000 to over 23,000 pounds per square inch. That completely blows the saltwater crocodile out of the water. Hell, that even beats the T-Rex. It's quite literally one of the strongest bite forces of any land animal in history. When Deinosuchus clamped its jaws down on a dinosaur's leg, it wasn't just holding on. The sheer kinetic energy of the bite would instantly shatter the femur into shrapnel. Escaping wasn't an option, because the moment the jaws closed, the limb you were trying to pull away with basically stopped functioning, which makes running away a bit difficult. But crocodilians have one major problem. They literally cannot chew. So how do you eat a dinosaur if you can't chew it? Because crocodilians don't have molars, they can't grind up their food. If they want to eat something bigger than their own head, they have to physically tear it into chunks that are small enough to swallow whole. They do this using the death roll. The death roll is a maneuver where the crocodile clamps onto its prey, tucks its legs against its body, and rapidly spins. The torque generated by this spin physically rips the flesh and bone right off the prey's body. But thinking about an 8.5-ton animal actually doing this is genuinely insane. Water is dense, so spinning 17,000 pounds of muscle underwater requires an unbelievable amount of core strength. When Deinosuchus locked onto a 3-ton dinosaur and initiated a death roll, once they got pulled underwater, the prey was completely doomed. The sheer rotational force of the spin would literally rip the dinosaur's appendages clean off its torso. The prey's body weight would act as an anchor, while the twisting force of the giant alligator basically just ripped it apart. This sounds terrifying in theory, but theory doesn't mean anything without proof. Did this actually happen? We don't have to guess if Deinosuchus hunted dinosaurs. We have the receipts. Paleontologists have uncovered fossilized dinosaur bones specifically from large hadrosaurs and medium-sized theropods that are completely covered in massive U-shaped bite marks. And we aren't talking about little surface scratches. These teeth punch straight into the bone marrow. But the most terrifying detail about these fossils is that none of the bite marks show any signs of healing. When paleontologists find bones with healed bite marks, it means the animal was attacked, managed to escape, and lived long enough for the bone to grow back. With Deinosuchus, there are no healed bones, which means if this thing bit you, you died. And no, they weren't just scavenging dead bodies. The placement of the bite marks on the limbs and the tail indicates these dinosaurs were attacked while they were standing on the water's edge, entirely unaware that the riverbed they were drinking from was actually a predator. They were probably just taking a sip of water, completely oblivious to the fact that the mud was actively deciding to eat them. So, we know they ate dinosaurs, but how would a fight between the terror croc and an apex predator actually play out? Let's put Deinosuchus up against a tyrannosaur. During the late Cretaceous, Deinosuchus shared its environment with dinosaurs like Albertosaurus and Appalachiosaurus, massive apex predators that were early relatives of the T-Rex. Let's say a 30-foot Appalachiosaurus approaches a murky river to get a drink. The dinosaur is smart, has great eyesight, and can easily crush bone. But none of that matters, because Deinosuchus doesn't fight fair. Crocodilians have specialized sensory organs on their snouts called ISOs. These are basically just built-in motion detectors, allowing them to feel exactly where something is in the water, even if they can't actually see it. Deinosuchus is sitting perfectly still at the bottom of the river. It doesn't need to see the dinosaur. It can feel the ripples of the dinosaur's tongue lapping the surface. In a fraction of a second, 8.5 tons of muscle explodes out of the water. To the Tyrannosaur, this was supposed to be a quick drink. To Deinosuchus, it was delivery. The Tyrannosaur's speed is completely useless because the attack happens before it even realizes what's going on. The broad snout slams onto the dinosaur's leg with 20,000 pounds of pressure. The bone instantly shatters. The Tyrannosaur tries to pull back, but is now anchored to an animal that weighs vastly more than it does. Deinosuchus simply throws it into reverse, dragging the screaming dinosaur into the deep water. Once they're submerged, the dinosaur's legs are completely useless. It has no leverage. Then, the death roll starts, and the fight is over. So in the water, Deinosuchus is completely untouchable. But what happens if the Tyrannosaur doesn't go in the water? If this exact same fight happens 50 feet away from the shoreline, the outcome completely flips. Deinosuchus was an absolute nightmare in the water, but on land, it was essentially just a stranded log. Gravity is brutal for animals this heavy. Water supports all that weight, but the moment it drags itself out onto dry land, It has to physically carry all 17,000 pounds of that weight on 4 sprawling legs. It could likely do an explosive lunge out of the water, but a sustained chase? Yeah, that's just not happening. Crocodilians also have a major limitation: lactic acid. When they exert energy on land, lactic acid builds up on their muscles incredibly fast. If they fight or run for too long outside of the water, their blood actually turns acidic, and well, they just die. If a tyrannosaur caught Deinosuchus out in the open, the dinosaur would easily win. The theropod's height advantage means it could just step around on the slow-moving croc and bite down on the back of its neck. Deinosuchus wouldn't even have the stamina to turn around and fight back. So this epic matchup would basically just be a dinosaur stepping over a very angry log. So it was heavily restricted to the water. But that still leaves one glaring question. How did it even get this big in the first place? You'll assume that to reach 35 feet long and 8 tons, Deinosuchus must have grown at an incredibly rapid pace, packing on hundreds of pounds of muscle every single year like a modern mammal. But when scientists actually looked at the fossils, they found the exact opposite. Crocodilians have bony plates on their backs called osteoderms. And just like trees, these bony plates have growth rings inside of them that record exactly how old the animal was and how fast it grew. When researchers cut into the osteoderms of Deinosuchus, they realized it didn't grow much faster than a modern alligator at all. It just never stopped. Modern alligators hit their maximum size after a couple of decades, and then their growth basically flatlines. Deinosuchus kept growing at a steady rate for over 50 years. It completely bypassed the need for a hyper-fast metabolism. All it really needed was an unbelievably long lifespan and the patience to sit in a river for half of a century while the pounds slowly packed on. It basically just weaponized waiting, or really just doing absolutely nothing for decades. But this raises a really interesting point. If the alligator blueprint is capable of reaching 35 feet and 8 tons, why aren't there 35-foot alligators in Florida right now? If you're wondering why we don't have giant dinosaur-eating alligators today, you can't blame their genetics. The real issue is the environment. Deinosuchus lived during the time called the Cretaceous thermal maximum. The Earth was incredibly hot. There were no ice caps, and sea levels were vastly higher than they are today. North America was actually split perfectly in half by a massive shallow ocean called the Western Interior Seaway. This created thousands of miles of swampy coastlines. For a cold-blooded reptile, the temperature of the air around them is everything. Now, I know you guys watching the Bio Guy are already incredibly hot, but the reptiles don't burn calories to create their own body heat. They just absorb it from the sun. To sustain an 8.5-ton cold-blooded body, the environment has to be sweltering hot year-round. If it gets too cold, an animal this big simply cannot warm its core temperature fast enough, and it will die. On top of that, maintaining 17,000 pounds of muscle requires a ridiculous amount of calories. The Cretaceous coastlines were packed with multi-ton dinosaurs coming to the water to drink every single day. Today's ecosystems just don't have enough calories to support an ambush predator of this scale. A modern alligator couldn't reach 8 tons today because, well, there aren't any 3-ton dinosaurs walking around the Everglades to feed it, and the local duck population just isn't going to cut it. So Deinosuchus was the absolute peak of this environment. But what if I told you that there was another giant that might have actually beaten it? While Deinosuchus is widely considered the king of North America, there was actually another giant living further south that actively rivals it for the crown of the biggest ever. A giant caiman called Purosaurus. Purosaurus didn't live with the dinosaurs. It lived much later, during the Miocene epoch, in the massive wetland systems of South America. And just like Deinosuchus, Purosaurus actually belonged to a completely different family tree. It was a giant caiman. But when it comes to size, these two are basically neck and neck. Both reached around 35 to 40 feet, both weighed around 8 tons. But their skulls were built slightly differently. Deinosuchus had a slightly longer, broader snout for grabbing dinosaurs off the shoreline. Purosaurus went in a different direction, rocking a shorter, robust skull that looked almost like a vault door. Because its snout was shorter, the leverage on its jaws was actually slightly better, which means Purosaurus probably bit even harder than Deinosuchus. Purosaurus didn't have any dinosaurs around to hunt, though. Instead, it was snapping up giant rodents, massive turtles, and ground sloths. But whether you think Deinosuchus or Purosaurus was the true king, they both suffered the exact same fate. and it wasn't from an asteroid. When you think about the death of these prehistoric giants, you immediately think of the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. But Deinosuchus actually went extinct millions of years before the asteroid even hit. Its downfall had absolutely nothing to do with a rock falling from the sky. It was completely wiped out by the ocean. Toward the end of the Cretaceous period, the Earth's climate began to slightly cool, and the tectonic plates shifted. The massive western interior seaway that split North America in half slowly began to drain and dry up. The thousands of miles of swampy coastlines that Deinosuchus relied on simply vanished. When your entire hunting strategy relies on being completely submerged in deep water to ambush prey, losing your deep water means you're basically screwed. The giant dinosaurs stopped coming to the coastlines because the coastlines didn't exist anymore. Deinosuchus was completely too big to adapt. The 8.5-ton bulk that made it completely invincible in a fight became the exact thing that killed it. It couldn't have traveled across dry land to find new habitats, and there wasn't enough food to keep it alive. So, it just starved. So the giant was dead, but strangely enough, the design wasn't. If you look at the apex predators of the ocean or the mammals on land, evolution is constantly changing things. Animals grow fur, they lose legs, they develop echolocation, they change their entire body structures to adapt to new problems. But if you look at a modern alligator today and compare it to Deinosuchus from 75 million years ago, they're basically identical, just smaller. And that's because the crocodilian body plan is one of the most overpowered designs in the history of the planet. Evolution essentially created the perfect aquatic ambush predator and then just stopped. It basically looked at the alligator and said, "Yep,
I am."
enough." Ruling an ecosystem doesn't always require warm blood, a massive brain, or some crazy coordinated team. Sometimes, all it takes is a heavily armored body, a jaw that can crush bone, and the patience to sit at the bottom of a river and wait. Deinosuchus proved that if you perfect the design, you don't have to chase your food. Eventually, the food will come to you. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know what prehistoric animal you want to see me cover next, because I actually do read through all your suggestions. And if you want to see another video on a similar topic, check this one out here.